EntreNetwork podcast. This is Sydney, your host. Today I have two special guests. Most of the time they're behind the camera or behind the sound equipment. Not Mikayla, but Michael is most of the time. So Michael is our incredible IT support specialist, but he also manages the podcast overall audio. So he does audio engineering, and he does the video production work as well. And then Mikayla is our project manager. She makes sure that the podcast is good and we're still on track, and we get all of this stuff pushed out within a timely manner. So let's start with Mikayla. What's your role with just the podcast overall?
Okay. There's a lot. So for those of you who don't know, we have two podcasts. We have EntreNetwork and we also have Young Creatives, hosted under Revision Marketing Group. So aside from doing things with clients and doing deals and all these other things, we decided to do two podcasts that release new episodes weekly.
At the same time.
At the same time.
All at the same time.
Yep.
So, Michael, what's your role within both podcasts?
Well, it's just, like you said, technical. Just setting up, sound and video, the cameras, the lights, running the tests on the mics, make sure we all sound good, and just getting all of the content and then throwing it into Adobe and, taking the audio and cutting it up, making it sound nice, just making it sound good, and then taking that audio, throwing it in with the video, making sure the video looks all good, adding all the appropriate branding, graphics, all that stuff we can get into more later.
It's definitely a lot. So the reason we started two podcasts at the same time was we started Young Creatives because I'm older. So the team said, hey, you're too old to be, you should have your own podcast.
Because you're too old.
Yeah, pretty much. So Young Creative features the younger generation, even though I'm like a year older, which is crazy. But it's focused on young creatives or millennials in the workplace and how they can express that creativity. Mikayla can explain it a lot better than I can.
Yeah, so it's like a total joke that he's too old to be on Young Creatives because he's already been on it a lot. But with Young Creatives, I think it focuses on young people in a traditional 8 to 5, and then what they do outside of that or how they bring creativity into their 8 to 5. So before I came to Revision, I thought creativity was like art, music, different things like that, but now seeing it within different things like IT, seeing different things within like the baking and all that kind of stuff, like music. But yeah, so our mission is basically to highlight that creativity and shine light on those different things within young people in a lot of different markets. So
yeah. And for EntreNetwork, it was started as like a passion project. I always had something in mind to help support entrepreneurship and just talk about it and listen to people's story, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So this platform just kind of allowed for me to be a student. So have some really special guests on and they talk about their overall story. And then I just listen in and then ask some questions that I'm super curious about just on this entrepreneurial journey. And then also adding value to our audience. So talking about marketing and branding, pulling technology into it. We had a good mix of episodes just to add value, but also tell a story of different entrepreneurs. So that's what this season was primarily about. So this episode, we'll talk more so about some of the technical stuff, the good, the bad, the ugly that we experienced with the overall podcast and launching two at once. And then, of course, doing video production in parallel with the audio. You need audio for a podcast, but coupling the video on top of that, and then how we was able to do branding for it, and then doing snippets and everything, and then communication and everybody's support that they played. Someone who we don't have on the podcast right now is Christian. So Christian is the project lead She's incredible. She was, for both podcasts, she interfaced with just different prospects or different guests that we wanted on the show. And it was her mission to get them on the show and get them acclimated and stuff like that. And then just communication, making sure that we have the guests, they have the time, they have the social media and stuff like that. But on the front end of it, let's talk about the overall branding for both podcasts. So with both podcasts, it's somewhat different. So it's under the Revision Marketing Group brand, but we didn't want to take on that identity as far as like the brand concept. So like the color scheme is different for each podcast, along with some of the graphics. Of course, EntreNetwork's graphics is simplistic. It's simplistic. That's a word that I'll use because I'm simple. I like to get straight to the point. And it would have been black and blue if it was up for me. But Mikayla, as the project manager, she said no. And she designed some awesome graphics. And then Christian assisted in terms of building out those graphics for each individual episode. So you want to kind of talk more about it?
Yeah, so before we started these podcasts, I've been working with Sydney for 10 months. Less than that.
Years.
Less than that, no. Probably like 8 months or so. And so I feel like I had a really good handle on what Sydney liked as far as like graphically. He's a very simple man. He doesn't like complicity within his graphics.
For that, it's from a branding standpoint, it's super hard to. So looking at it from a holistic approach, right? When you have this many outlets for like medium, so if we came up with like a super complex design for like the social graphics, like photos and stuff like that, it would be extremely hard to duplicate that across the video platform that we use, which is Premiere Pro and After Effects. We can definitely do it, but my skill set just isn't there, and we didn't want to outsource it to somebody else. So simplicity was the goal for that because we knew we wanted to have it not just on like for graphics, but also pull some of those brand elements into Premiere Pro with the video, motion graphics and stuff like that, and still have something that's consistent. So when people see EntreNetwork and they see Young Creative, it's consistent, whether it's a photo or it's a video, right, or a YouTube thumbnail or.
Right. So balancing those two things were a little difficult for Young Creatives just because we did have a lot of ideas graphically. But that really helped us, like as far as like nailing down what aspects we needed to have for branding. Because when we were making certain things, we weren't thinking about video or we weren't thinking about social media things. Like we were only thinking about the one thing that we were working on. And that was a lot of learning. It was a really big learning curve at first, but going into season 2, we're definitely super excited and we know what to expect as far as what materials are needed. So
yeah, definitely. So with the podcast, it's a lot of stuff that we just didn't foresee. And we didn't understand how difficult it would be to develop all of this content specifically for 2 podcasts on a consistent basis. Now that we do, we're better equipped to plan this stuff out and strategize a little bit more and anticipate some of these things. So the biggest hiccup that we found was the video production workflow. So we do video production every now and then for clients and stuff like that, but not at a scale where it's consistent and you're working with 4K footage and you're dumping it into network drive and all of these technical things. And then trying to edit it on more than one computer. It's a insane workflow. And most of that is kind of like contingent on, or you have to have the video content so we can push that out on social media. So you have all of these stage gates, so to speak, where it's like, hey, we already recorded the footage. Now we have to release the long form video, which is going to be YouTube, and then short form snippets, which is going to be on Instagram, LinkedIn, all of these different platforms. So with all of that in mind and still looking at trying to get more for the next week and release some additional ones for the additional week and scheduling guests and rescheduling guests and then doing internal podcasts. So we didn't anticipate how tough it would be.
Right.
At all.
But with that, I think my favorite part in this entire process was, so each person in this company basically has some of their own projects. So Michael deals with a lot of state and federal contracts, as do I, but it's very segregated in a way. And as far as Christian, she does a lot of the events and communications with clients. Cindy does everything else. And so we don't really get a lot of insight outside of the podcast of what each of us are working on. And so putting these out on a weekly basis, I would say, has extremely improved teamwork, communication, and the ability to see growth among other team members. Just because now I get excited when Michael's like, oh yeah, I got the audio done in 10 minutes. Because the first episode, how long would you say it, in the beginning, how long would you say it took you to
an audio edit?
Yeah.
A couple hours.
And so how long do you turn them around now?
30, 45 minutes at most.
Right.
Yep. So it's out. It goes back into our values of constant improvement, which is really good because going into it, it's everything is new.
Yeah.
Everything is extremely new, and we push the team, push myself as well to a point where it's I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. But with time and passion and just being able to ask questions and research, everyone was able to constantly improve over the season of both episodes or podcasts, which is phenomenal. Because if you look at episode 1 compared to episode 11 or 12 of this one, the production quality is better, the audio quality is better, the show notes are better. And us interfacing with different guests is a lot better because we was able to streamline the overall process. And I want to talk about Michael. We got this awesome document here, and we do a lot of SOPs, which is standard operating procedures. With this podcast been so dense, as far as what you have to do on a weekly basis, and then it's handed off to the project manager and then the sound engineer / video editor, and then me to review, and then Christian to reach out to prospects or guests.
Or social media or anything else.
And scheduling social media and getting the video edits and stuff like that. Show notes, it's a lot. It's a lot. So this is kind of the foundation that we use, and Michael developed it. It's the foundation that we use for pretty much a checklist where it goes into detail on what has to happen at each stage. So we call those stage gates. The first one is come up with a topic and a guest. And then we put that into let's talk about the SOP first. And then the next one is reaching out to guests and gathering information, such as if they're actually interested, coming up with the official questions, where we have this document that's on brand with both EntreNetwork and then Young Creative that we officially send to the guests, welcoming them. And talking about what we're trying to accomplish with the podcast, say they have an idea about it, and also are prompted with the questions. And even that, I think it touches 3 out of 4 people in a team. So just that alone, it's a lot.
It's before we even start recording.
Yep, it's well before we start recording. And then basically gathering all of that information, we streamlined that process, but everything was, we was able to come up and see what we did on each stage gate, identify which stage gate it actually was, and then just wrote it down on paper, and then of course typed it up, and from there we was able to test it. So we basically just tested it, printed out the paper, and said, hey, does this work? Or should we do this instead? Or a good one is the call that we have before we actually schedule a podcast, where Young Creative, we had 2 different workflows, or we was, for the first 2 or 3 episodes, it was like ad hoc, where we're getting guests in and talking about topics and stuff like that. But it's more so on the fly because we know we have to do it on a weekly basis. But as we gathered that information, and then I was doing outreach and getting guests in for the podcast, we came to a consensus and then came together and was like, which one is the best approach? And took from both. So with that, I think having 2 podcasts, that helped out a lot as far as us being able to get everything situated quickly. I think
this was before we even released them to the podcast. Like, we did 3 or 4 episodes for each podcast before we were like, all right, we're gonna announce this. So we did a lot of legwork up front to be able to catch up and push them out for the new year.
Exactly. And with that, we didn't really have any like video templates. I think we only had like social media post, which was the graphics that's like, hey, excited to interview this person. And we had brand kits with the colors and the logos and stuff like that. But we didn't integrate like the video graphics until a little bit later. And then I was going to say smacked it on top of it. Yeah, we smacked it on top of the video after. So after the 3-4 episodes, and then we had all of this data. And then we had issues with the shared drive, the network drive. So from a technical standpoint, because me and Michael love to get into the technical stuff, how we manage the data, it's so we have 2 editing PCs that we use for video production. Primarily, we use Adobe Suite or Creative Cloud. So that's Premiere Pro and After Effects. But we also use a Panasonic GH4, GH5, and then a Sony A7 III for video production and photography. So we shoot 4K, and it's a lot of data per episode, especially it's a lot of data per episode if it's an in-person one. So we store that data or we stored it on a network drive, which is a custom-built PC that held 12 terabytes, but it's redundant. So I think we have 4 10-terabyte drives on there, which is 40 terabytes, which is a lot of data or a lot of storage capacity. But of course, we want to be able to make sure that it's safe. So that's where the redundancy comes in. And that's a RAID array. I forgot what number it is. But we had issues with that. So we had to move on to building another computer or revamping a computer that we had.
Literally in the office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To handle the raw data that's coming out of it. And then we next season we'll most likely implement a larger SSD, or we'll probably do the episodes on a weekly basis and then offload it onto the network drive, which is a little bit slower. But yeah, that's the technical stuff.
Yeah,
we'll see. It's a lot of moving parts to just the video podcast that people don't see, but we wanted to kind of shed light on it because it's definitely fun and rewarding. I think the podcast, it allows us to talk to one another, even though we do that throughout the day, but talk to one another about stuff that we're passionate about, and work that we're actually working on, and then interview some amazing people and let other people tell their story. And then also the process of constantly improving upon our process, and stuff that we enjoy to do or that we're growing to enjoy to do that we didn't know was so fulfilling. I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, you was in audition and you was able to clip the tracks together.
Yeah.
And you was like, yo.
Yeah, I mean, it's only, just generally saves me like one tiny step. But even then, like when you're doing it so much, those few seconds difference, they really feel like a lot. And, especially when it's like with editing audio and sequences, like, because what I had to do before is if I had to, split that. So what I would have to do is, to insert a commercial's audio into the middle of the podcast, you have to find a good point in the podcast's audio where there's a kind of a stop in the conversation or kind of a pause where you can cut it, have some space in between it, and then throw some commercial, give it a little bit of a pause, and then throw the commercial's audio in there, let it kind of fade out, and then let that the main audio come back in.
Yep.
So taking the main podcast edit that I had done prior without the commercial, which is just the professional audio with an intro and outro for whatever podcast it is. Of course, with the levels normalized, cutting things to where using the hard limiter function and in Audition to make sure nothing, and then normalizing it all around -3 decibels, which is a pretty standard, I think, for most sound production. Or I don't know all the science behind decibels. I didn't pay attention that day in 4th grade science, but I do all that. I cut all that. I normalize all that. And then I go back into that in Audition and I say, okay, and now I find a point where the waves kind of go and there's nothing going, and then you cut it. And then before I would have to take the entire audio track and move it. And sometimes I think we had one time where we had some podcast audio that I had moved to put a commercial in, but I had forgotten to go back and push the track that went after that, so they got overlaid. So in the audio that was exported, they were both of these audio tracks were playing on top of each other, and it sounded like it didn't sound good. So what I would have to do is really make sure that I was going in to make sure I was moving that back, and then I would have to realign like the outro audio, which isn't really that hard because of how I try and do it, but it's still, that's like at the most it takes like a minute or two, but even then it's just kind of like, oh, I got to do this again. But yeah, just like going and looking a little bit more through the right tab options when I highlighted everything, because I knew how stuff in Premiere was linked, audio and video files in the tracks in Premiere. And I was like, well, surely I can do this in Audition too. And sure enough, there it was. So now I don't have to go in there and move it. I can just make it all one thing and then move it all, and it all moves together. So
indeed,
it makes my life a lot easier.
And just things like that, where it's like you learn so much within these different programs. And I want to give a huge shout out to Adobe. This is not sponsored by them. This is sponsored by Project Brand Reconstruction for the 12th time this episode. Look for more sponsorships next season, potentially, right? But
yes, it will be happening. I promise.
But it is just so much stuff that you can learn in Adobe. So with Audition, Michael had a background in just sound overall. I think you said you played in a band.
Oh, well, I had a podcast when I was a kid, if I've never told y'all.
No, you did tell me that. Oh.
I don't talk about it a whole lot. No, I didn't run it. It was me and my younger brother and my mom. But we had a podcast. It didn't run for very long. It was just something that we kind of did for fun, and people like in our family circle listened to it or whatever. But no, yeah. So I had experience with that, and then I've been playing guitar, and I've been in bands. So yeah, and then I used to run soundboard at my church for a while there. So actually, I did have some sound background, I guess.
Yeah, mine
more than me. So
more than me as well. With video production, I started just video production for like music videos and stuff like that. But the sound, I didn't have to work with any kind of sound equipment. So once we started the podcast, we had to invest into just equipment. So I had to do a lot of research to see what to get. And all of this, like the overall podcast, was inspired by Nick, who was our
Jones. Shout out.
Nick, who was our videographer at the time. So I had I always write like business plans and just plans to try to see what's possible. And also give me the ability to write something down and really think it out, and then come back to it a few months later and look at it and see if it actually makes sense. So it helps me in the future. So that was EntreNetwork, which was probably 2 years ago, where I saw a need for more education and more knowledge in terms of entrepreneurship, because I didn't have it when I grew up. So I wanted to kind of fill that need and also incorporate a mentorship program into it, where you have a mentoree and a mentor, I guess. But also just educating people. So with that, Nick came up. We was in a snowstorm.
Yep.
And Nick was like, "Hey, let's come up with a podcast." And it was like, "What?" So we named it Collab. Collab for collaboration.
You're the real ones if you know what we're talking about right now.
So that's where this kind of spun from, and then we invested in equipment, and then we didn't go down that path, but we was able to pivot, and then the podcast for EntreNetwork came about, and then Collab became, because Collab was originally for us to kind of come together and just talk about collaboration, or the power of collaboration, and us being creative in this creative agency and our outlets and stuff like that. So that pivoted into young creatives, because most of us are young except me.
Stop it. Jeez.
So I have the old person EntreNetwork, which is this one, which is, if you're listening, you're probably the older generation.
No offense.
No, it's good, because with that, it's a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom, and that's what I am trying to learn, or what we're all trying to learn, and really just provide value that way, where we educate people, and then they educate us as well, because a lot of the questions and a lot of the guests that we had on this season for EntreNetwork, it's like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know this was possible. So it's all, yeah, I'm always talking about the older generation, just a wealth of knowledge. But I digress. With the overall podcast, that was kind of like the origin story, but we had to invest in equipment. And it stayed dormant for a while. So we invested in, I think, the Rodecaster Pro, and then some mics, and then we probably shouldn't have. And then we recently got these little things, and then chairs and stuff like that. And we recently got the floors redone in here, so it looks a lot better in the office that we're at now. And then we have a table, and kind of dedicated this office or this room for just overall podcasting. So with that, it's been a journey, definitely investments, but the return on investment in terms of what we're able to talk about, and us building personal brands and connections with different people, it's just incredible. And I look forward to keeping it up. But yeah, let's get back into the overall SOP. Yeah, so with the shoot date, or before the shoot date, we have a interview with the guests, where we give them a call just to learn a little bit more about them, because some guests that we have, it's people that we don't truly know, but we think they would add value to the audience. So we interview them first as a team, and then we tell them our overall roles, and then they tell us about themselves. And then we go over the questions, and if they have any questions that they want to add and stuff like that, that's where we put it on a questionnaire and gather.
I would argue that this is honestly one of the most important steps before shoot date. And I only say that because I didn't even recommend doing this until I researched it, and then it made sense because I was inviting somebody on Young Creatives that the team didn't know. And so even though I knew I was going to be interviewing him, I still want Michael to know who he is in case he has to reach out to him, or Cindy has to reach out to him, or Christian has to reach out to him. And honestly, it's been like the best, like, because you can go into a pre-interview thinking, okay, this is what we're going to talk about, at least for first season. We're going to talk about second season a little bit later. But for first season, we had like, okay, this is what we're going to talk about. And then you have like the person, but then the person can start talking about something completely different that you think is absolutely incredible. You still want to highlight on the podcast, but it changes. And so that's when we came up with the idea to do the questions, the official quote unquote questions after the pre-interview, because we were doing that vice versa before. And
it was changes. Constant. But with that, it's always constant improvement and learning. So with season 2, it's going to be better and more organized and structured. But before the shoot date, we don't have we have the topic, and then we don't really have lately we have, and going forward we will, but we didn't have the episode number. So dealing with everything in Canva, creating a social media post with the episode number on there, and then creating a folder where we dump the footage and stuff like that. It's important to associate that number or the name of the official podcast with those, so it's consistent. Because the structure that we have right now, we have data pretty much everywhere, so the raw audio. So if you look at it, we record to the Podcaster Pro onto an SD card. And then we have the 2 cameras that records just the video. It captures the audio, but not the professional audio. So we have 3 sources of data, as you will. So we dump, or Michael dumps the camera A, camera B, and then the audio onto the computer. At first, it was the network drive, but editing over an Ethernet connection is fun and slow. Now we're doing it on a local machine and backing up on a nightly basis to the network drive. But with that, everything lives on that one computer, and then it's backed up on the other one. So Michael edits the audio first, or if you want to kind of get into your process after we shoot.
Oh, okay. So we shoot. The first thing I do is just dump the footage. As mentioned, just take everything, just whatever's there, edits and all the raw footage, you just take it from the SD cards, from the camera, from the soundboard, wherever we record it, and just, get it on to wherever it's going to be stored, be it network drive, be it local machine, whatever. And that takes a little bit of time because, you're just transferring large amounts of data over anything. Once you have all that, though, because we have, folders for every podcast, we have different, directories and things like that. We try and keep it pretty consistent with the folder templates that we use. To make sure everything, just at least in terms of the file structure, looks the same. So you can say, all right, this is where, if this thing is not there, this is where it should be, basically. And so from there, once I've got everything off, clear off the SD cards, and then first things first, edit the audio. Pretty much because, you kind of mentioned earlier, it's a podcast. I mean, if you want to have any, I think if you want to have any content ready for, it's the podcast, right? It's the audio. But also specifically, really, and practically, because, we need that edited sound file to be able to sync it with the video file, which is, something that you can do in Premiere, just video editing software in general, because if we just use the audio from the cameras, it would sound like we'd be talking inside of a trash can, it would sound echoey and tinny, and it would sound lame. So go in and go into the audio and Audition, go into the sequence, which is basically the way that Audition and a lot of sound editing software works is that all your tracks are these, it's like a big view, and it's got basically stacks, kind of just a stack of rectangles, basically, and each one operates as an individualized sequence that controls whatever audio file that you drag in there, which is in and of itself a little rectangle that takes up, a certain part of that track, right? And when you play it, there's a little line that goes across it. It plays everything as it comes across it, et cetera, et cetera. And you layer different things. If you were making a song, for example, you would have one layer for your bass, one layer for one sequence for your bass, one for your drums, one for your vocals, one for your instruments, and they would all be playing at different intervals. but that's how you would figure out how things go, and you would move it around to where it all is on beat, it's all synced well together. It's the same logic with the podcast. So we have the intro, which plays first.
And the intro was produced by Michael, actually.
Yeah, I did do the intro.
And the outro.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing, but
And when we say did it, he actually brought the guitar and a bass drum, and what else was it?
Well, I brought my guitar, and I have a friend of mine. He let me borrow. He has a big African style hand drum. I brought that and my amp because I don't have. It's just something I've been needing to buy for years. Is one of the USB instrument interfaces, so you can plug an instrument directly into your computer. A good buddy of mine who makes a lot of music at home has one, and I keep seeing it at his house, and I'm like, I got to get one of those.
Why you don't just take his?
Oh,
Forever.
Okay.
I don't think I can do that to him. So I, did my best to, reduce any sound, any extra noise, and then just figured out a chord progression, and I played it, and then I put on headphones and played drums along with it as it was playing in my headphones, and then I went into audition and kind of did what I said. I threw the drum track in there, I threw the guitar track in there, and it was a little tedious because I was still a little. I'm still honestly I want to make music in that way, but it's so much of a different process because it's music, and there's so many other even just aside from audition, you've got Ableton and there's so many different digital audio workspaces.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of sit there and finagle with it to make sure it was on beat, and I had to re-record it a couple of times, and it still was missing something. So I went on the internet and I found a sample of somebody hitting a tambourine, right, that's what they're called, and then I sat there and listened to it and literally dragged the little sample every time where it hit the beat. And of course, I'm sure there's a much more, much more optimized and practical way to do that. But it was literally I was like, okay, I'm just figuring this out to make it sound good. And I think it turned out pretty okay. I think I'm happy.
Oh, absolutely, it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds.
From all of us giving you literally no guidance, we were like, Michael, make an intro. And you were like, okay.
I like music, so it wasn't that big of a deal, I guess, but I digress. So the intro, we get that thrown in there, and then, the one thing that I really learned how to do originally was one of the first things I learned how to do was how to do the fade in and the fade out, which is actually really easy with Audition, thankfully. It's literally you just go into the track, and at the beginning and end they have these little squares, and you click on them and you click fade in, fade out, and you can edit how it goes. They have this little line that visualizes it to where, again, as it plays, you can set it to kind of gradually go down or stay a little loud and then go down really quick, or go down really quick and then hold a lower volume. It's all about just that kind of level with it. It's a really, really cool, really easy thing to do for because sound editing, fade outs, and it's just something that you need to have pretty readily available. So yeah, really good functionality there. And then really the backbone of it all, just to keep the sound quality, is, as mentioned earlier, the hard limiter and the normalizer, because, we've had some podcast audio where it was some people, they talked a little quieter than you thought, or they were doing, one of these numbers a whole lot, and you'll be able to hear the sound quality in me doing that because, I tell our guests, your mouth, when you talk into a microphone, it's a cone of sound. It comes out of your mouth and it makes a circle right here. And you have to make sure if you're going to turn your head that, you still got the microphone in your cone. But a lot of people, and that's, not a dig against anybody. It's just very human nature to turn, and then your cone's not facing the microphone. So, but luckily, with that functionality, and also you can go in and manually edit just the volume specifically of different tracks, which is what I was doing for a long time until I learned how to do the hard limiter and everything, which made that whole process more of if the hard limiter and normalizer doesn't work, then I'll go in and I'll manually edit the levels like that. Yeah. So what that does is it takes the wave, and that's just the raw wave file. And it just I take it, into the multi-track for one. The way that we record everything onto an SD card is it basically records the podcast across multiple different channels in the same file, and it has different channels for each isolated source of sound. So right now in this recording, there's going to be one like overall recording where it's like got all of us on the recording, but there's going to be one file where it's just my sound for this episode. There's one for just Sydney, one for just Mikayla. That's just the nature of how that kind of recording works. So I take the one that has all of us and I just kind of drag it. I give it this, I give it that hard limiter. I give it the normalizer, get it all together. And at that point, the waveform, it goes from sometimes being like, all this to just like, very solid, very clean, or less than, but that's of course the point where you go in and turn up the dial, make it a little louder. So yeah, I do that for, both. There's some, usually with the podcast, there's like a couple audio tracks because, length depending or whatever. Yeah. Go in, make cuts where it's like, like in the beginning, if we were just like talking before we were, actually starting, we were just rolling. And at the end too, just do all that. And the most important thing, at least for this first cut, is to not make any cuts of the content initially, because of course, there are going to be some podcasts where it's like somebody misspeaks, or you actually have like somebody like they lose their train of thought and they're in the podcast like, oh, I forgot. And, we were like, okay, it's fine. We're going to edit it and post. But as mentioned earlier, you got to have this one raw audio sequence that's got all the boo-boos in it and everything so that it can be synced up to the video. Yeah. And then we can make those cuts in the video and then just make the cuts out of the audio file itself in a separate audio file, which is going to have the commercial in it as well, because there's no purpose for being the commercial when it's, again, the main purpose of this one edit is to throw it over the video essentially. Yeah, with that, it's so just with both of those, we have the two ones that we export. So one is it has commercials, and then it's cleaned up as far as if it's an awkward period, it's just editing the audio and condensing it and cutting it up and stuff like that. And then the other one is just raw. So you have the intro and you have the outro, no cuts in between, no cleanup or anything like that, besides to normalize the video to make it everyone's voice sound the same loudness and fullness, I guess. So with that, we're able to sync it up to Premiere Pro for camera A and camera B, because if we have just any cut, we had some instances where we had like a cut. And it can be like a 0.05 second cut, like the tiniest of errors here can just throw the whole sync off. Yeah, such a pain. It is, because with that, if the podcast runs a little bit long, I think longer than 40 minutes, it splits it into two clips. So you have this multi-track clip, which has like 18 tracks or something like that. Probably not, but you have the stereo, and then you have each individualized microphone. So if you needed to go into there and normalize each individual track, you have that ability. But it cuts it. So it's 40 minutes, and then the other 40 minutes if it's an hour, or 20 minutes if it's an hour, is cut. So in Audition, you have to put those together. So if it's like an overlap or it's a small gap in between, once we try to bring it into Premiere Pro and then sync it, it doesn't sync, or the front of it syncs and it looks like it's good until you get past that 40-minute mark, and then it's out of sync as far as the camera's lips talking. But we can get into the video workflow a lot, just like the video and audio, because it's just one of the most time-consuming parts of the podcast. But in episode or season 2, we're looking forward to trying to consolidate that workflow a little bit more. We were able to for episodes 6 through 12 for this one. Just created a production inside of Premiere Pro, which allows you to duplicate different projects. So we have a template where it's like, hey, step 1, step 2. Where step 1 is the multicam edit. Step 2 is something else where you sync it or you throw in the raw audio so you can see. So with a multi-cut or a multi-camera edit, you have, like Michael was saying, you did a really good job visualizing that. I'm not sure if it was like when he was talking about the layers with the music and stuff like that. It's pretty much the same with
Premiere Pro, where you have the tracks for video, you have the tracks for audio. Track 1 is camera A. Track 2 is camera B. So you synchronize those things, and then you edit a multicam. So if I try to visualize it like he did, it's pretty much 3 tracks of audio and then 1 track or 2 tracks of video. And we use those multi-tracks where it segments the individual mics to make the multi-cuts or multi-track edits. So when you have 2 cameras, once it flips to this one versus that one, that's a manual process where you have to manually switch between them inside of Premiere Pro. So with that, instead of listening to the entire 40 to 60 minute podcast, pretty much syncing the multi-track. So you can see which, if this mic is talking a lot more, you can just fast forward to that and make that cut to the correct camera. Versus if you have one focused on Mikayla, you can link it directly to the microphone and fast forward to that and then make the switch and basically do that on and off. So I think when we first started that, we was doing it manually, and then we started syncing it, and it cut down the production time by pretty much half.
Yeah,
because
easy.
you're able to.
Yeah, but I mean, literally, that's pretty much all I did, or not all I did today, but it's a lot of what I did today was that, and I was able to get like 4 or 5 episodes done.
Yeah.
Versus having one take like the whole afternoon.
Yeah, so it's but all of that comes from just learning about the overall process. And Mikayla, I think this is the first time she's getting real insight into just the challenges for the video production workflow, because it's like consolidated to Michael and myself. And then Mikayla focuses a little bit more high level to make sure that everything is on track. But all of this, as a team, this is how we kind of go about the overall podcast, but strategizing a little bit more as we learn more and becoming more efficient through the overall podcast for season 2. Super excited for that. And then Mikayla, after Michael does the long form video, which is for YouTube, he makes short form snippets, which is it's a different beast because we're getting into like captions inside of Premiere Pro. We also experimented a little bit with Vid, which is an online
.io.
An online platform that allows you to import videos into it. But that workflow just didn't work because the sheer volume of snippets that we did, or how we waited for to actually do the long form and then build up with the short form video snippets, because the goal per episode is to get at least 8 snippets, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a lot after.
That's 96
Yeah,
for one
total.
season.
And and you get those snippets, like I've mentioned it, or I don't know if I mentioned it, but I've been developing, here and there, the video editing SOP, basically something like this, but more in detail for specifically video editing. And I've been I was trying to think about how to describe a good snippet in the SOP, and I was just find something where it's like. It's basically, where somebody gives just a good sound bit, something that sounds where it's like, oh, you hear this and it's like a piece of advice, or like a deep moment, or somebody talking about like a defining moment in their career, or something that or something that really revolves around the themes of the episode, and just sounds interesting, because I mean, like, something can be interesting, but it's like you got to find it where like you can tell the person they care about what they're talking about.
Has passion behind what they're saying.
Yeah. And that sometimes can take a while too, and also it really does depend on the episode and the content, because some episodes are definitely and that's nothing wrong with that. It's just sometimes some guests are a little bit more like they've been on a podcast before, or they're kind of used to it, versus somebody who.
Or they're nervous.
Or who's nervous, or who doesn't really know, like, and again, that's not a bad thing. It's just, you can look at it and you can sometimes, I've seen it a lot in some of the episodes that I'm editing, where you initially somebody, they don't have the best, like those best little things that you can just short cut out and be like, all right, cool. But as the podcast kind of goes on more, and like the second, I say not second half, more like the latter 2/3, where you can kind of tell that they come out of their shell a little bit.
They're warming up.
Yeah. Because I think especially if you've never been in front of a camera or a mic, it's definitely a weird thing.
Right.
With that, it's
all a mindset too.
Yeah, I think Christian, when we brought her on, she was like, "Yeah, I've never been like on a podcast or in front of a," or we all haven't. But it's pretty much a conversation, which allows it to be a lot easier. You're not talking directly into the camera because it's super intimidating. But now we're able to look into the camera, or at least I am, and feel somewhat comfortable if I have someone here to kind of talk to me about it, right? Because it's more so conversational. Whereas I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, when I wanted to do a solo episode, we skipped that one because I wasn't able to add enough value or talk directly into the camera without talking to someone.
Well, also, I just had this thought. I think part of the reason that people like podcasts, at least in my opinion, is because they like to feel like they're part of a conversation, and that's a figurative and a literal way. Like for me, I like to listen to podcasts when I'm trying to focus because it makes me feel like it's like I have to trick my brain into focusing by making it almost be distracted by something else. It's like I have to make my brain be like, okay, here's this thing that I'm going to be able to have to actively zone out so I can focus on this. So that's how I do it. But again, it's for me, it's like that sense of, it's like a sense of community. Like you're not there for sure, but like it's like you're just listening in on these people talking about stuff. And that's why like you hear podcasts that maybe aren't good because the hosts have no chemistry. They're not bouncing things off each other. And that it's supposed to flow like a conversation. Yeah. So I think single. I honestly think not that I think it's a lot harder to do a single person podcast just in theory because so much I think of what defines podcasts is lost. Yeah. With the presence of only one person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is definitely because with the podcast it's complex as far as like the functionality of it because just like with a podcast traditional sense you have like the conversational, but you also have, I think we did where we did an event, marketing and branding your business for EntreNetwork, and that was also conversational. But with the educational side of it, you also want to balance the education with that. But I think even that, having someone else on there where you can still bounce those different ideas helps out a lot. As far as the quality of the content and the diversity of it.
You need a straight man.
Indeed, or a straight woman.
I think a lot of the few, I don't listen to a whole lot of podcasts in my free time, but the few I do, it's usually like they have the one person who's like kind of leads the narrative of the episode, and then every now and then they pause and they all have their banter, and then they kind of keep going.
So thank you guys for coming back. We took a short break to make sure that the cameras were still rolling. We're using 64 gigabyte SD cards. The GH5 allows us to have dual memory or dual slots. So once the 64 is up, it pushes directly to the other one. But the GH4, it doesn't allow for that. So we had to make sure that one is still good. And we got a good 30 minutes on that one. But yeah, back into it. The overall process and us learning a lot from just the overall podcast. Talking about the video production side of it. We haven't gotten into the show notes, but I do want to talk about that and also give not a shout out, but insight into another tool that we use. So we use transcription or text. So transcribe that text, the audio text in Premiere Pro for like the captions. Recently posted and stuff on the Young Creative Podcast from episode 6 through 12, where we have the social media and then you just transcribe. The big thing with that is trying to stay on brand. So we have a brand font that we was able to import into Premiere Pro, import into Canva, Photoshop, After Effects, to make sure that we have that consistency across the different podcasts. And that's super important because you want it to look consistent, whether that be on a photo or you're doing a quick edit on Canva or something more advanced in After Effects, you want to make sure that you have that brand consistency. And Mikayla did an incredible job in terms of making sure that it was on brand or coming up with the brand. The brand assets. She came up with some super complex designs initially, and I was like, yo, because I was thinking about the video production workflow.
And I wasn't. So I was just thinking like social media. I was like, they ain't no thing. Like,
yeah, it's definitely not until you bring it into After Effects and try to create motion graphics and stay on brand with it. It's fun. It takes a different skill set. And for me, I love it, but it's just too time consuming to learn so much about it. I can definitely get lost in it. And I do get lost in it sometimes, but it goes back to value or time allocation. So I have to focus on a lot of other stuff. So yeah, but yeah, to the show notes. So after Michael does like the actual video or the audio, he goes ahead and put it on what is it, transcript?
The one without the commercial.
Otter.
Or is it the one with the commercial?
So it's the one with the commercials.
What are you talking about?
So both.
Otter.
We're talking about Otter.
Otter. So
Gotcha. Okay.
So we have we do it in both, right? So we transcribe the entire video after we do all of the edits, so we can quickly go through and also benefit from the social media templates having the captions on there that's on brand. But we also do it in Outer, which allows us allows Christian to go about looking at the what's been said in there, and it's a really awesome program. Which one of you guys have more experience with it? You?
All I know is I upload stuff to it, and to Anchor. I didn't mention Anchor.
Oh yeah, Anchor.
That's what we, because Anchor's for Spotify, or is it for Apple Music too?
Spotify. It's owned primarily by Spotify.
I think it is. I think it's like actually just by Spotify. Like I think Spotify is like their own native thing.
Right.
And that allows for us to so we upload the audio there, the show notes and the photos and stuff like that, and then it shoots over to Spotify and Apple.
It's basically like Spotify for podcasters, and their podcasting platform is Anchor. And so Anchor, when you create a podcast on Spotify, spits out what's called an RSS feed. So an RSS feed is essentially a way to speak across different channels of there's a new episode of this podcast without publishing it everywhere, which saves so much time. Whoever created RSS feeds, you are a godsend. But yeah, that's it explained very, very shortly, briefly, in the simplest way possible.
And with that, RSS feeds, going into the technical stuff, and then Zapier, so Zapier allows us to talk to different APIs, and I think RSS feeds is somewhat similar because it allows you to post on one platform and then it disseminates to these other ones or shoots the information there. So with the Zapier and the APIs, it allows us to look at one system. If something happens in there, you can have the ability to shoot it directly to different ones. So I've seen a parallel there, but I digress. And then, yeah.
Yeah, so that's Anchor. But going back to Otter and show notes, so Michael uploads the final audio clip to Otter, which then essentially uploads to this program. Otter's amazing. Otter's great. It talks, when it transcribes the audio, it gives you the most popular words at the top. And so it helps me a lot because it helps me disseminate if it's not like named yet, like, okay, what episode is this? So if it's Justin is a really like popular word, okay, no, this is Justin's episode. And then from there you can also, it's like the audio tracks that Michael was talking about, like the different layers. It just like basically it's just like, okay, there's speaker 1, 2, and 3, and then you can go in and name those from Sydney to Michael to Mikayla. So for this Otter upload, it'll be 3 speakers, and then you can go ahead and verify those. You can highlight things for social media snippets or captions, and it helps so much with show notes just because you can either, depending on what time frame you have, you can listen to it and it go ahead and it does like the Kindle reading, you know how it like follows along like an audiobook. Otherwise, you can go ahead and basically just like read it and find those specific things. And show notes is super hard because you need to stay consistent with the timestamps, because with Spotify and different platforms, a lot of things I also realized with researching podcasts is that not everybody's going to sit down and listen to the full episode. So if I was super interested in this one part of the episode, but I only have like 10 minutes to listen to it or whatever it might be, I can go ahead and go through the show notes, click that specific timestamp, and it brings me straight to that part in the conversation. Yeah, so that's basically the benefits of Otter.
Yeah, it's super incredible. I think the key word for this one is going to be podcast. But yeah,
or Premiere Pro.
Premiere Pro, EP, Premiere Pro. And with that, it allows for us to create those show notes and push that to Anchor, which does push it out to the other ones. And then, yeah, we also use some of it, or we have experimented with it for meetings. So if we have like a meeting and we don't want to take super detailed notes and I'm forgetful, so I know that I'm going to forget, we just record it with Otter and then transcribes that audio. And then from there, specifically like with website designs and people talking about their business, we can multi-purpose that and then clean it up a little bit and put it onto the individual pages on a website. Also for like client creative sessions and things like that. It's definitely a good resource that we haven't utilized a lot, but it's super practical, especially like us developing standard operating procedures. I love to show, so we're getting in the spirit of like recording videos and then audio with that, explaining stuff. So you benefit from that visual and audio aid, but then being able to transcribe it and then produce a SOP document. So it's just incredible. But yeah, show notes. So Christian is the one who does the show notes now, and Mikayla is really just making sure that we're staying on brand, and then quality assurance, approval of different topics and stuff like that. And yeah, it's definitely a lot within the overall workflow. But the marketing side of it, so we always share resources with the people who come on the podcast. So with that, once we produce we take photos with the camera. So if we have those, we go ahead and add it to the Google Drive. So for our clients, and then for pretty much everything, Google Drive is the foundation for like file storage. If it's not video, like the raw video, that's the foundation for like data storage, and we organize it and have permissions and stuff like that. But we send that Google Drive link to the guest that has like the photos, the creative graphics, so they can
Snippets.
share online, the questions, and pretty much anything else that's applicable to that episode. We share that with the interviewee. And yeah, did I miss anything for?
And then outside of that folder, we organize it again ourselves. So specific audio tracks, headshots, when we need those for specifically, most likely EntreNetwork. Otherwise, it's like lifestyle shots, whatever. And then, I'm trying to think, am I missing anything?
I don't think so.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's 4:00 and we're kind of fried.
Yeah.
But, this episode is the final one for the season. And we just wanted to kind of give you guys insight into the overall process for podcasting. From a marketing standpoint, we share all of this information or all of these social media snippets to interviewees, but we also use it for ourselves, right? So from a marketing standpoint, for both podcasts, we know that we have different demographics. So one is more so geared towards the younger generation, and then providing value to that community. Then the other one is more so business owners and entrepreneurs and startup businesses that want to hear different stories about entrepreneurship or benefit from practical knowledge and tips on marketing, branding, and technology. So EntreNetwork's target audience is specifically LinkedIn short form video content. And then we also have a Facebook page. We don't have Instagram, I don't believe. We do? Well, yeah, we do have Instagram. And then for young creative, we have Instagram, which is going to be the primary one. And then we have Facebook. And those are the two primary social media channels and outlets for that. And with that, it's all about the target audience.
Hopefully TikTok coming next season.
TikTok.
I'm so excited. Anyways.
But it's all about the target audience and where they are. As far as what's the approach, where do you post these snippets at? And then, of course, me, for EntreNetwork, I use it for like personal branding. So some of the snippets I post on my personal LinkedIn, just to build a community around just entrepreneurship, and make connections with different people, and allow them to connect with me so I can learn as much as possible. And yeah, so.
And then from there, like all the guests that we have on there, hopefully share our posts or a copy of our post to their social media, which then drives more traffic to us. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the ideal plan, but.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And with the podcast or any podcast, unless it's, you have a big budget for marketing, it's slow building, which is long form. And we didn't get into SEO for transcriptions. You can benefit from search engine optimization if you add this content to your website.
Yep.
So search engine optimization helps you in the search engine as it sounds. But you can get someone or you can get us to actually clean up the raw audio transcript and create it or make it into a blog post where it's talking about a specific topic. So if you're not a writer, like I'm not, you have the ability to just talk. You can record it pretty much anywhere, and then transcribe that into a blog post, because
Right.
a lot of business owners or a lot of people, a lot of industry experts, so CPAs, accountants, who else is something, engineers, and pretty much anybody, they have industry knowledge that they can talk about in a storytelling way or a practical way. And then from that, you can go ahead and create a blog post, because I think we all have something to talk about. And for like automation and some tips and tricks that we use for like Zapier and CRMs and then website and some of the tools that we use for that, we can talk about it a lot. But writing about it is a little bit different. It's more time consuming. Michael likes it more than anyone else on the team. So he may prefer to do the writing instead of the podcast and then transcribing it. Whereas I prefer to talk about it and then transcribe it and clean up the audio, but clean up the transcription. But anyway, blog posts, it's so many different ways you can multi-purpose just a podcast overall, especially if it's a video podcast. But hopefully this episode serves as a way to give you guys insight into what it's like to have two weekly podcasts and some of the struggles that we went through, to hopefully allow you not to repeat it And if you guys have any questions, get at us. Of course, we're super passionate about it, and we have experience with it. And yeah, if you have any questions, let us know. And most likely we'll start producing podcasts for other people because we have kind of improved.
Extensive knowledge now.
After one season, and then after season 2, it's going to be a lot more than that, and the efficiency is going to increase dramatically. So we're super excited to start season 2 for both, and yeah.
So before we go, I want to ask both of you, what was your favorite moment in season 1?
In season 1, mine have to be, I want to say the second and the last episodes. I think the second one is the one with Drayden, because he talked so much about just his love for Shreveport and trying to push the city forward. And then see him just kind of light up as he talked about just the city of Shreveport. And we always hear it when he comes in office. He's like, Shreveport, 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 and what he's doing in the city. And, exactly, and being involved. It's really good to feed off of that energy. So I think that was a really incredible moment. And then the one with Aisha. So Aisha is simply incredible. She talked about a lot on this podcast, but I asked some really good questions, and she responded incredibly well. And it was really good to see that side of her and see her in person and engage in that way. And then we had some phenomenal guests throughout. But I think those two speak to me the most because I was able to see my progression as far as like the questions that I was able to ask because Drayden was the first guest and then Aisha was the last guest. And throughout that period, I have been able to better communicate with people that I know, like, and trust, and then people that I don't know. So this has allowed me to come out my shell a little bit more. And then the technical side of it, gee whiz. It's so many small pieces where it's like a headache or it's frustration, specifically for like the videos and learning all of this stuff with audio and stuff like that. But after you get it, it's a lot of gratitude that I had once I figured it out or I found an easier way to do something. And I'm like, what? Why didn't I think of this before? But then it's like, well, I am so in love with the overall process of banging my head on the table. Not really.
Oh my goodness.
Banging your head on the table and trying to get this right, to being able to do it and then do it with ease and then feeling good about talking about it, and hopefully helping other people not go through that by sharing knowledge and practical tips, which comes full circle into what EntreNetwork is. Yeah.
Michael?
I don't know. I don't even know if I can remember that far back. I don't know if my brain has that.
Our first episodes that we published were September 23rd.
September 23rd.
Oh, yeah, that would be right about the time when my brain starts to get a little foggy.
My brain is bad a week out. But yeah, it's a lot of good moments because just seeing Michael just light up at some of the small things, right? Or just learning something new, and it's like, what? This makes it so much easier. Even though it saves like 5-10 seconds, just having that and then being able to do it, it adds a lot of value to us as individuals. And then, of course, the efficiency on the side of video production and audio, because I think for the first 1 or 2 episodes, Michael went through like audition and he went through like the wavelengths and tried to normalize it manually. Yeah, it took some time, right?
It's doable, but it's hard for sure.
Yeah, and I came back and I was like, what? Because I didn't know how to do it either. But I was like, it's got to be a better way. And then we found out how to normalize the audio, which makes it sound like this, where it's if you have those quiet points where someone is talking quiet versus someone who's talking a little bit louder, it pulls up the quiet voices and normalize it into like negative 3B. So it's no spikes or no valleys in the audio. That's not the right terminology, but yeah. What about yours, Mikayla?
I think this was like one of my first official chimes doing project management. And I think I say to Sydney at least 20 times a week, this is hard. Like, this is really hard. And I will not stop saying it. Because with the more stuff that comes, hopefully the easier it gets. Or the things that I'm saying now is hard get easier. So I guess I would have to say like my first or like my nicest, greatest moment of season 1 was just being able to stick to it, like having all of us being able to see the commitment straight through, even when it got crazy. Like, there was a couple points in times where we were all just looking at each other like,
are we going to shoot this week? No. We got them scheduled out.
Yeah. I don't want to shoot this week, or like this, like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish this in time, or blah, 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 blah. And even if we didn't finish it in the ideal time, we never, like, you guys never saw that because we always had one pushing out each week. And it's crazy because watching other people is not something I'm used to. Like, I'm just so, like, centered, focused, like, okay, I'm going to focus on me, do my thing, get my task done, and then moving that to, like, making sure that all the parts are moving at the right speed and everybody has their own parts is hard. So
yeah, it's definitely hard because for us it's like it's so much work to do. How do you actually push out or disseminate different task items? Because it's like you have so much in front of you to the point where it's like, okay, I need to get these done, my task items. But for me, growing as a individual and then a business owner, I had so much on my plate where it's like I have to give it to someone else, and then I have to provide enough guidance to give it to someone else, and then trust that they ask the right questions. But it's like you have to create the work for yourself. You have to do the work, and you also have to create the work for your team, and then provide feedback. And then allowing Mikayla to come into that position of project management and leadership, and then everything else that comes with it, the conversations, the late nights. It's like
the tears, the laughs.
It's like this is a lot, and you have to be strong and you have to carry it. But we're always preaching constant improvement because it's always constant improvement. It's not a bad thing if we don't get it right. We just provide feedback, repeat, try again, because that's all we can hope for as individuals. So she comes to me and she's like, well, we focus high level and talk about strategy. And like yesterday, I think, we talked about like season 2 and my vision for EntreNetwork, and talking about like planning out all of the episodes and then plugging guests into it after the fact instead. And everything else that comes with it, once you start writing things down to really see with additional task items and like, okay, we need to do another brand kit for this, and then we need to do these graphics, and then automate the process of
this video
this
template
process.
or
It's a lot. But that insight allows for it to be a lot easier with project management. But the process of doing it is just like, ooh, I got this other project that I have to work on. But Mikayla is taking it with grace. It is definitely a lot of tough periods. but it's constant improvement.
Yeah.
And she's vocal about saying, hey, this is tough. And I'm always like, hey, what you need? How can I support? Or do you want me to interject? And she's like, no. And it's like, yeah, you have to sometimes struggle through things to learn and get those experiences. Even like throwing like video production at Michael, or throwing some of the graphic design work at Christian. It's like, we're not comfortable doing it, but you do it long enough, it's like, okay, this is not as bad as it seems. I think like 3 episodes ago for Christian,
it was her first time hosting.
Yeah, it was her first time hosting, and Mikayla, as project manager, she was like, hey, I need you to host this one with Sydney.
And it was very last minute.
Super last minute. I think 20 minutes to prep. And she was like, she didn't express it like vocally, but she was like, "Arr." But that episode, once we got into it, it just flowed naturally. I mean, it was a really good episode.
It was really good.
Indeed. And she's
We're about to be out of time on the camera, or at least on one of them. I didn't want to interject. I just wanted y'all to know.
No, thank you for that. But with that, she was able to get comfortable because it's uncomfortable, right? So we have those periods in work and in life where it's just a super duper uncomfortable position, but we all learn from it. Hopefully, we have the capacity to push back those emotions and that fear and do it, and then just learn from it, because I'm finding nothing is as bad as it seems. Even if it seems super bad, everything is good. We're still living. So
you woke up today. You got food on your table.
Got coffee. Yeah. Everything is good.
Me as an overthinker, that's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah. I was gonna say I don't think about anything.
Oh God. That's good hearing from our founder. Thank you so much for joining us
on EntreNetwork podcast.
Thank you.
But truly, this is the team, and then Christian, incredible team, hardworking, and just constant improvement, transparency, and results. So thank y'all so much for coming to the EntreNetwork podcast. We'll see you guys in a few weeks.
2022.
And we'll give you guys additional insight into how we plan for
little teasers.
2, and do a blooper reel, and then delete all of the
raw data.
Delete all of the raw data from season 1. So yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in.
See ya.